Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here today for another episode of Page Tune with PL Stuart. And we'll go around the room and introduce everybody. But we're here today with Thomas Howard Riley and Mark Timmony. We'll be talking all things fantasy and writing and all sorts of stuff or whatever else comes up during the conversation. So, PL, you want to kick us off with an introduction and tell us about your awesome new book and how great the release is going?
Oh, thanks so much, Steve. Honored to be here. Wouldn't be here without Steve. This is his channel, and I'm very grateful that he's asked me to co-host this amazing podcast. P.L. Stewart here, author of A Drawn Kingdom and the Last Save of the Atalanteans that just came out. You know, things are going well, and again, just happy to be here and to participate with Steve and these two fantastic authors who I admire, and their books are on my TBR. But I'll let them talk.
Mark, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Mark Timmony. I am the author of The Blood of the Spear, book one in the Eye of Eternity series. It's kind of classic fantasy, two half-brothers destined by prophecy to save the world. And not really wanting to have anything to do with that. They have their own plans, their own dreams, and having to survive lots of different factions, either wanting to control them or see them dead. I'm an Aussie, so it's Sunday morning here in Sydney. Happy Easter, those of you who celebrate it. Happy Chocolate Egg Day to those who don't. And I'm really excited to be here talking with you guys today.
I'm going to use that chocolate egg day.
I like that.
And our friend Thomas is a little under the weather, but he's toughing it out for us today, so we'll go easy on him. But Thomas, you want to tell us about yourself in as few words as possible, so you don't.
Yeah,
hurt
sure.
yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me out, you guys. My name is Thomas Howard Riley. I'm the author of We Break Immortals. It's a very chunky, epic fantasy, dark as hell but funny. Basically, I call it rated R epic fantasy. And
That's a good
apologies for my voice today because it's just out of control.
I think
I
you
do
might
have,
find
I
some
do have a
people.
little helper here who's helping me out.
Oh,
Oh.
cute.
So I think you might find there are some people who like your voice all husky like that.
Right.
You might get lots of fan mail after this.
Yeah. You guys are and when I say your books are high on my TBR, they're high on a lot of people's TBR, and obviously getting some rave reviews. I love the chonkers, so I love reading big books. I cannot lie. I like big books. I am very much looking forward to reading yours. I guess the one thing, and I want to ask both of you, and sparing Tom's voice, of course. Um, you've built up a reputation as being phenomenal world builders, and I really appreciate world building in my novels. So, is that something that was really important to you in crafting a fantasy novel, or was that just more or less something that you intended to make something that was immersive, but then you got into it and you kept, oh well, I want to make it more immersive, and you kept building from there. Like, what was your strategy for your world building?
Personally, I'm a geek for world building. I love it. The more world building I can find in a story or a novel that I pick up, the better. Oftentimes, I will forgive any lack of characterization or character development in a story if the world itself is the character and I'm like fully involved in it. So that was kind of how I started with mine. I was like, yeah, I want to write fantasy. Like I started reading Dragonlance back when it first came out. I'm aging myself here. And it was kind of, that was my entry to epic fantasy or even sword and sorcery, and I was like, this was amazing. This was like all my daydreams, on the page. It was, and I got lost in those worlds. And when I decided I wanted to write, my first thing was like, well, I need a world. I need to start building all this stuff, and it just went from there. So when I started, thinking about the Eye of Eternity series or the world Sobia that it's set in. Even before I had an actual story to write within it, I was building the world. I was building the history, the realms, defining them, giving them their own quirks, and then layering. So while I don't know specific details of every epoch before the one that we're currently in the world now, I have points and timeline points at any given time. I can like, all right, let's go into there and let's start pulling out exactly what was going on. I know overarching timelines and historical points. Details, not so much, but that's part of the fun for me in writing. Is again, it's also how I don't plot. I don't do detailed plot outlines. I do a broad map, and then I discover the terrain as I go along. So yeah, world building. It's just like, yeah, something I love. Can't stay away from it.
And Andrew says, "Blood of the Spear is like Steven Erickson writing The Eye of the World."
Well, that's awesome. Thank
It's a
you.
big compliment. Wow, it's
It
amazing.
is a big compliment. Eye of the World or Jordan was a massive influence for me in the type of story I wanted to write, and the type of world building. And then obviously Malazan's been one of my favorite series as well. The world building in there is massive and complex and mind blowing. So yeah, any comparisons to either of those, I'm like, yes, thank you.
And Andrew is also reading both The Drowned Kingdom and We Break Immortals in the next 3 months. He's going indie focused.
Thank you. Honored.
More
Thank you very
indie,
much.
yes.
Yes.
I'm honored.
More than
Hope you
honored.
enjoy it.
And we know that our friend Thomas is huge on world building. He's builds worlds that we may never even see. So,
Yes, this is
what's your
very
approach to
much
that?
true. Yeah, I am obsessed with world building. Not at the expense of the rest of my story, not at the expense of, having character driven arcs and quality stories, but I have to have world. I'm just like, I'll go on binges where I will in between actually writing, I'll just go off world building, making up places, cultures, notes, family trees. I've talked with Steve about this before. I have lists of character names for books that aren't going to be written until like 2025. So it's
I feel you.
yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm definitely big on the world building, and it like Mark said, it's just very important to me to have a whole world. I'm a big fan of reading nonfiction history books and just knowing that there's all this weight of history leaning into the events that are happening in the moment enhances the things that are happening in the moment for me, in fictional worlds. So I really appreciate that, and I'm a lore maniac. So I have read the appendices at the back of Return of the King more than I've read Return of the King, that kind of thing. So like
That's me, man. I'm with
like
you.
I have a timeline chronology of the Forgotten Realms, going through just a timeline chronology, not any stories, just the things that happened, and I like to flip through those things. So I'm kind of obsessive about it, but I just really feel like it can impact a story in a positive way. Like it can really, when done correctly, it can really immerse you, and immersiveness is important to a story because it helps capture you and keep you in that story and keep you wrapped up in it.
And Mark, how do you keep track of your worlds that you build? Do you use spreadsheets or notes, or do you leave it in a vault that has a big lock on it? How do you keep track of it?
I've got spreadsheets, basically. I've looked at using things like, what is it? OneNote or something like that. I've even looked at like some online programs. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but there's some fairly big ones that D&D players or GMs use. But at the end of the day, it's basically, like I was saying before, I work best when I don't fully flesh things out on paper and work from notes. So as long as I've got the notes, and spreadsheets work really well for that, I'll just put the note in and it'll be like, oh yeah, it's as soon as I read it, it's like it triggers the whole unspooling of idea in my head. It's the same with my map. I've got like all these places on the map that we won't visit in the series, but if I had to, I just look at the name of the place on the map and I'll be like, oh yeah, no, it's this. And then, I think about the realm that it's in and the political powers and the factions that are involved there. And it's like, yep, it's this, and this fits here and this works there. And it's, I don't know, once I've got the, I guess the template of the world in my head, it becomes easier to start fitting things in and understanding the repercussions and how it all connects. So yeah, as long as I've got notes on the spreadsheet, I've got little tabs for different factions, details for the hierarchy and the names of things, specific timeline events, and a full a full glossary for characters, and character names and where they get used or have been referenced, which becomes a thing. Yeah, it's spreadsheets basically.
Nice. And Andrew is waiting for a campfire sponsor. Sorry.
Yeah, that one. I don't know. There's another one that I can't remember its name. It doesn't matter, but it's got a lot of YouTube videos up, and different. I think one of the things that stopped me using those was that my intellectual property would be locked behind a paywall. Then, if I stopped paying for it, it's a little bit more difficult to get it all out. So I didn't want to start creating all this stuff that I had to access, had to pay to access. So I was like, you know what? I'll just use my plain old spreadsheet. It's not very pretty, but it does the job.
It's effective. So I have a question for really all three of you, but as as a reader, when you have this big, huge world that you're building and you have it all plotted out and you have it planned out for years in your minds or in your documents or spreadsheets, how do you know how to roll it out to a reader? How do you know when to, because you know it so well, how do you know when to pull back or when to reveal more of the world through the series? So how do you deliver it, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask to the reader. Whether you have any methods?
Thomas, go.
Well, it's I know it when I feel it, basically. I kind of have it. The further in the future stories go, the fuzzier it is. The less things are nailed down. So I'll know maybe a certain event will happen or a certain pair of characters will meet somewhere down the road, but I won't know how. And I won't know what their interaction is going to be like, whether they're going to be friends or enemies at that point, things like that. The closer to what I'm working on right now, the more concrete things get in what I'm planning. But even in books that I'm working on, my outlines are never fully concrete, kind of like to what Mark was saying. I do pre-writing where I think out in my head, what I want to have happen and what would be interesting to have happen, and then just from there, I just have like a very loose outline of what's going to happen. I don't know how the conversations are going to go. I just know that I want some characters to have a conversation, and then I'll see how that plays out and arrange things from there depending on what I want to do. As far as the exposing the world itself. I mostly sprinkle in things for the most part because it just, I follow the iceberg principle. You only want to show like 5% of what's actually there. Obviously, there are a few examples in We Break Immortals in particular where I have to go pretty in depth into things regarding the magic system, not for the sake of showing off the magic system, but because a lot of the problem solving in the book relates to how to counteract or work within the magic system to undo what's happening in order to resolve some of the conflicts and some of the battles. So I do have to go a little bit into detail on that, but even then, I don't throw everything in there. I mean, I have things on my website and even things in the appendix of the book that go far further into detail regarding the magic system than I actually get to in the book. So it's mostly just whatever it takes to flavor the story, mixed with whatever information you need to actually execute in the story in that moment.
And Thomas, do you ever let your cat decide? That's the big question.
My cat does decide the winners of my giveaways. So we have a paw placement technique that she uses. So
it's a new Bitcoin, I guess.
She is very attentive to me when I'm talking to somebody on the phone or on speakerphone or anything like that. She wants to know what's going on, who I'm talking to, and what's up. She's very suspicious.
Rightfully so.
I'll let Mark answer the same question.
Yeah, sure. Well, for me, it was a case of the two half brothers start in a remote village. It's basically they live on the borderlands of One Realm and the Deadlands, and there's not a lot of contact with the rest of the world, so they have their own kind of isolated little society. And as they leave that area and travel through the different parts of the world that they travel through, things just organically grow and they become exposed. So the reader is becoming exposed at the same time the characters are becoming exposed to other parts of the world and other traditions and cultures and cities that have more than 100 people in them and things like that. I remember that I think I did that quite well. Janny Wirtz read the book and gave me a cover blurb, and one of her comments was that by the time she'd gotten to the end of the book, her jaw was just like had dropped open from what I'd started with and what I'd expanded to. It just kind of blew her mind. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. Thank you. But to me, it just seemed a natural progression. It's like, well, they start here and they only know this, and as they move and the world expands around them, naturally that's a good place for me to start expanding the world for the reader. I avoided a lot of info dumping due to my editor, who was just like, nah, get rid of it, it's info dumping, you don't need it. So I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll wait till later, because I have to explain the magic system later on when people or when characters start learning how to use the magic system. We'll talk about the explanation of what's what then. I'll just leave it for the moment. And there was a little bit of, in some areas, there's a little bit of sink or swim. It's kind of like, it's epic fantasy. It shouldn't be outside the realm of what you're used to reading. So you can fill in the gaps, but, it has its own flavor. And hopefully I did that well. I got a lot of good feedback about organic world building. So, yay.
Yeah, using a character as the window to the world building is a terrific idea. And I have one character who doesn't really know much of anything about the world, and another character that knows a lot about the world. And so a lot of it is the one character explaining it to the other one as they go through. And I always try, even with the magic system, in most cases, I try to keep information about that tied into what they're doing. So the character will be investigating the magic and looking at what happened and what was done with it, and he'll be explaining it to other characters who don't know anything about it, why he's doing what he's doing and why it's important what he's doing in that moment. So I try to keep those situations at least somewhat interactive, and so that you can so it's not straight info dumping. It's characters playing off one another, so that there's still that dynamic of characters that you can play with, where they're still exploring the relationship of the characters even while they're detailing information to each other. So one character can explain what's happening, and the other character can say, "Oh, that's interesting," or they can say, "Okay, that's the fourth thing you've explained to me. I'm getting bored. When can we get out of here? I need a drink." Things like that. So you can, I like to do it that way, where you can play with the character relationships at the same time as delivering information. But again, it's mostly for magic system. For what Mark was talking about the straight world building, I prefer to keep that as much in little sprinkles as possible, little snippets of conversation, things people are talking about, to keep it, like he was saying, more organic feeling and less like you're reading a passage from an encyclopedia all of a sudden in the middle of the book.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Learning through the character's eyes is what I usually latch onto most. And just really quickly, Mark, as far as blurbs go, that would be a good blurb. I don't know if you can discuss that with Andrew, but go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta say, man, if I'm not sure if Thomas and Mark are aware that we had Jenny Wirtz on page
Yes.
chewing, and she is I worship her writing, and to have an endorsement from Jenny Wirtz, who I think a lot of people would say she's almost peerless in terms of world building.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's a pretty big compliment, Mark. So
yeah,
I think
huge.
you're huge. So I think with my world building, I do a few different things. I mix and match, because the first novel focuses a lot on my version of Atlantis, and no spoilers there, it ends up sinking. There's a lot of world building in terms of giving you the background of Atlantis compressed in a whole part. The rest of the world building is a lot more organic throughout the rest of the novel, but I have a first person POV with a flawed main character, and you see the world exclusively through his eyes. So that's why my world building may feel a bit different, because things are missing. You're not quite sure what, but that's part of I hopefully the intrigue of how I write. For me, because I have 20 books planned in the same universe, some of them being prequels, where there's characters that are referred to in, for example, A John Came the Last Atlanteans, that they're going to be books about those characters. They're historical characters that are referred to in the book, you're going to go back centuries in the future in my future books and see, were these people really the way the character in the John Kingdom saga saw them, and they're not going to be. So that's a lot of the kind of little tricks that I play with the world building in terms of exposing the reader to it. But while we're on that subject, so we talked about Jenny Wirtz. She's to me like my top world builders. Among them for sure, Jenny Wirtz, George R. Martin, Tolkien. Right, like there's many other great ones, but those are ones that really come to mind in terms of their craft. Who are for Mark and Thomas? Who are some of your favorite world builders that you find that
That's a good question.
Well, certainly those ones. But I was a big fan of Dragonlance series, Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman. And that kind of is what sparked my whole world building thing. That combined with Tolkien, obviously, is the idea of having a huge world where your no single story is going to be able to contain everything that happens in that world. And that is kind of what inspired me to want to make a kind of a self-contained franchise world where I will have different stories involving different characters, maybe in different time periods, maybe in the same places or different places, you don't know. and obviously they'll all be connected in the fact that they're part of the same history, part of the same world, but they may have characters that may not ever interact with each other. And so I'm like UPL, I'm going to have a lot of books in the series that may not even be part of the main storyline, the main series. That, obviously they'll have little Easter eggs and things to connect them and whatnot. But but by and large, it's going to involve it may be something that happens 20 years before the characters in this book were born, or 500 years before, or 1,000 years before, or 500 years after. Things like that. And that's kind of the main inspiration for what I wanted to do, kind of just in a general way with my world building, was from Dragonlance. But writing wise, storytelling wise, I've been inspired by George R. R. Martin from a technical aspect of it, like how to manage multi POV storylines, how to manage lots of characters that don't interact with each other in a large world, and how to do that economically. A big fan of Brandon Sanderson, because minds that think about magic systems tend to think alike, so I enjoy his stuff as well. Robin Hobb, I'm a huge Robin Hobb fan. Jack LeCarry. Who else? Oh, I've just started reading Joe Abercrombie recently, and I get a kick out of that because his some of his humor is some of his dry humor is similar to some of the dry humor that I tend to write. So I kind of am enjoying getting to finally get into his world as well.
Yeah, so obviously Janny Wirtz was a big influence for me. Raymond Feist, so Magician, the Riftwall Saga. I first came across Janny's writing when she paired up with him to do the Empire trilogy, which blew my mind. I thought that's still today one of my favorite trilogies ever. So then I went to find everything that she'd ever written, and just have been following her ever since. Stephen Erickson, the Malazan stuff, I know he wasn't the single world builder there, but just the scope of what he and Ian Cameron Esselmont have done. Melanie Rawn's Sunrunner series, I thought that was amazing and hugely intricate in terms of how events in the past will then affect the events that are playing out in the story. The political aspect as well, in a lot of those, like in the Empire trilogy, the George R. R. Martin stuff. There are actually so many different writers whose world building has influenced me. Michelle West, I've come across her before. Melissa McPhail, and she's fairly recent, but her world building has just blown me away as I read through the Sephriel's Hand, the Shadows, or the Patterns of Shadow and Light series. Mark T. Barnes, who's written a trilogy called The Empire, Echoes of Empire. He's an Aussie. I've actually become really good mates with him. His world building consistently just astounds me. And then things like I'm a big World of Warcraft player, and the world building in some of that, and the wikis and stuff that you can deep dive into. I remember watching or listening to a podcast with Chris Metzen, who was for many years the driving creative force behind most of the world building, talking about how the team would approach the building of new expansions, and they'd use like a triangle type system where you'd have at the top the things that are being focused on in the story there, but then also remembering, well, what's going on over here and what's happening over here at the same time, and all that type of stuff are things that I've pulled into how I approach world building. Warhammer 40k and the Horus Heresy stuff just blows my mind still to this day, and I lose hours reading the online fan wikis about all the history and the different factions and the events that happen. sometimes they're really good places to just get a whole a big picture overview of something and be like, oh, these are things that I need to consider as I build. I was never a big Tolkien reader or fan as I entered fantasy reading. I certainly appreciate what he's done now. I was just never a big fan of the actual writing of Lord of the Rings, but I think his world building's amazing. So I think I'm probably more influenced by people who were influenced by him, as opposed to have been, being influenced by the grandfather of epic fantasy directly.
And I wonder, does being a student, like, does being a fan of history, is that in world building and all this history and looking into wikis and looking into all these different family lineages and all this stuff that's not in the book, does that go hand in hand? Is that typically, are all of you fans of history in general?
Yeah, you just my minor in university was history. It was medieval, as in medieval English with a minor in history. So yeah, I like Mark is saying, I've lost hours of my life to reading real history and fake history. So but that to me is for me, again, it's not for every reader, but it's the flavor for me that really makes a book. Besides the character development, if you have world building and character development, you have me. If you have those two things in concert, there's very little you can do to not make me like your book, right? We all like, I'm not sure to say we all, I'm not speaking for everyone. A lot of people like the big battle scenes or magical battle scenes, all that stuff. And I think the action set pieces are great, and they also are wonderful. But for me, if you have those other two elements, I've read books that have absolutely virtually no fighting or battle scenes whatsoever. Name of the Wind, Patrick Rothfuss comes to mind, where that there's a distinct absence of that stuff, but the book is just phenomenal. And and of course I've read books that are predominantly mainly action, like the Evan Winter stuff, Rage of Dragons and Fire's Vengeance, and that stuff is great, and he has great world building, and I'm not trying to take anything away from him on that, but the focus is obviously the battle scenes. But if I'm going to have a choice between one or the other, I'll take the world building, first and foremost, and the character development over anything else. So
I think I'm a fan of ancient history, but I never studied it deeply. I remember doing at high school stuff about Greece and Sparta and ancient Egypt and things like that, and that certainly had more of my attention than any type of modern history we would look at. So I guess I'm more of a fan of made-up history than I am of actual history. But again, having the bird's eye view of the overview of events and how they directly impact the changes and development in world and culture as you go along is really insightful in what you're doing and what you're creating. I think a lot of the time with the world building I come across in novels that really impacts me is when you'll get a hint or a reference to something, and that's all it was, and you can see that it's impacted the story or the people around you, but you don't know the specifics, so it's all off screen. And I think being able to delve into off-screen events or things that have happened in the past and sprinkle them throughout that give weight and just this a feeling of depth is important. And I think those writers who have that type of setup in their book tend to engage me or excite me a little bit more than people who info dump all the stuff and give you pages of this backstory that may not actually be fully relevant to what's happening with the characters. So I love world building, but I also love it when it gives me just enough to fire my imagination and make me go, I want to know more. I want to keep reading. You're going to tell me more about this. Am I going to find out? So yeah, that's I guess that's me.
What about you, Thomas?
I'm sorry, as far as world building in general,
Or just history, or if you're
like actual history. Yes, I'm a huge fan of reading history. I'm not, modern history, but mostly ancient history, medieval history, things like that. I like to use that as a treasure trove of things to beg, borrow, and steal from, to use as plot points and history points in my books, because there's nothing quite so fucked up as things that happened in actual real life. And so you can always find a way to there's always something interesting that you can find there in actual history that will allow you to make your story more interesting, I think, if you look far enough for it. But it also gives you a good litmus test as to how realistic your own stuff is. If the things that you're talking about happening in your kingdom are comparative to things that have happened in things that you've seen in history, it can help ground you in a sense of realism, as much as you can have a sense of realism in fantasy, obviously. But that's a big part of it, is making the fantastical seem real, seem realistic, seem like it could actually be happening. Yeah, definitely history in and of itself is a big impact on that in my stories.
You were going to say something, Mark?
Yeah, I think as well, it really helps. Things don't happen in a vacuum. And I think it's important to remember that when writing and world building. So things are happening to your characters, are experiencing stuff, but there's always wider world events going on or having happened to influence what's happening there. And I just think it adds depth and flavor to story if those types of things are reflected in the events that are moving characters. So being able to beg, borrow, or steal from real world events, or even having an understanding of how things in the past have affected the rest of the world today, still is really, it can be quite insightful in how to demonstrate or have characters respond or experience stuff happening around them.
Yeah, I think what I love about books, especially if books have like a macro, whereby the characters are on this micro level, but they are influencing things on a macro level. That is what I crave in fantasy. That the characters themselves, they may or may not think that they're important, but they don't realize how important and influential they are on the greater story. And that's definitely, and speaking to, when it comes to history, speaking to things that are compelling, themes that, I know for me, I write about things that a lot of them are unpleasant themes, but again, things like, racism, colonialism, misogyny, religious intolerance, homophobia, things like that. But things that have confounded us through the centuries. These aren't, these aren't new problems. These are just problems that, have continued, and we have issues solving them. But I love to see characters that they're grappling with these problems on a micro level, but then on a macro level, they don't realize how interconnected they are to these larger issues. And but the one thing I've heard about both your books consistently is that you're also not shy in tackling difficult themes. So can you talk about some of the themes that you discuss in your books? Sorry, without spoilers. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I guess and this is one I'm a little bit, I do have a little bit of concern moving forward with this one, is that there is slavery involved in specific cultures in my world. One particular culture is a non-human culture that's kind of at war with humanity, and they will enslave humans. But there is also another culture that's very xenophobic, I guess is the right word. And while their port cities are open to people from other cultures coming in, if you leave the city walls and are caught, you're basically enslaved. So I'm a little, it's not something that I've experienced myself. I can only draw on historical references. But it is something that will be addressed certainly in book 2 or looked at. And it's not me trying to appropriate any people's experiences. It's just a reflection of things that have happened in human culture, and as enlightened as humanity is on this world, because I've gone to great lengths to remove homophobia from it, to remove any type of sexism, and make it an equal playing field. And basically, it's traditionally the firstborn will inherit in noble houses, but it doesn't matter if you're male or female. It's irrelevant. So, but there was one thing that that I have kept is slavery. It's referenced in book 1. And it's not something that our characters have ever experienced in where they grew up. So it's a bit of a shock to them when they come across it. But that will be looked at more in book 2. I know it's a sensitive topic for a lot of people, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. I hope I'm respectful with it, but basically, the way I approach everything, again, it was the organic world building. It's what feels logical, I guess, to me. And there are people who, and a great deal of the world who doesn't approve of slavery, so that will be reflected as well.
Thomas?
Yeah, as far as dark themes, yeah, I definitely delve into some of those. One of the benefits of having a large world is you have a lot of different cultures to play with. Um, but I haven't tackled too much of the heavy cultural issues, like cultural conflicts, in book 1. In the book 2 I'm working on, I delve more into that. The How the people who have magic are treated differently in different cultures versus one another. Some where they are embraced, some where they are tolerated, some where you can buy your way into favor, and the rest of them get arrested. Some of them where they're oppressed or even exterminated. So I am working in my current work in progress in delving into more of the dark aspects of that, where um, entire groups of people are being targeted in that way. So those are some of the darker aspects. I mean, in We Break Immortals, it's more the individual characters' conflicts with each other, characters being predisposed to hating what each other are and what they represent. One of the characters is a person who tracks down and captures, criminal magic users, basically criminal sorcerers. And he's basically like a medieval version of a homicide detective, because in my world it's a medieval world, but they have like sort of magic CSI type tools that they can use to track these people, and he exclusively deals with murders. So his focus is on these people that do these terrible things, and so in his mind, in his eyes, all of them are awful, because everything he sees all day long is just the awfulest stuff that the awfulest among them have done. And then one of my other characters is an actual magic user, not like a murderer, but like a thief, person who was raised on the streets and things like that. And she has been hunted by people like him, the low level people like him who chase people like her, and they treat her, the society in general treats her the same way they treat these murderers in a lot of respects. Like, a lot of the punishments are the same regardless of the crime, as long as you're of this group of people who has the magic powers. And so it's a conflict of how he sees her and how she sees him, or what each other represent, and how they have to, when they ultimately collide, they have to deal with that and come to terms with who each other are. So it's not so much them interacting with society or pressing against society. It's more like what society has programmed in, and what their experiences in society have programmed into them, coming forward when they butt against each other.
And of course, Thomas just reminded me. So I've also got magic users in my world. So there was the conceit in my story is that 3,000 years ago, there was a race of magic users known as the Sarin, or summoners, and they get a almost like a holographic tattoo appears on their hand from using this type of magic, or having the ability to summon kind of elementals or elemental forces, and they caused, or a war between the summoners caused the Sundering, which destroyed the civilization they'd built. And it took a long time, once they had started summoning demons, to kill all the demons off. And since that time, anyone who was born with the mark of the summoner, or on whom it appears later in life, are executed. Like, there's no ifs or buts. It's done, and you can't hide it because it's this hologram that appears on above your the back of your the palm of your hand. So one of the things that is, to varying degrees, more strictly enforced, is when you greet people, you show your hand. So if you've got gloves, have got flaps built into them, including gauntlets that you have to lift so you can show. So there is, I suppose, there's that aspect, that anybody who it appears on is killed. The magic users who are left, who don't have the ability to summon, and don't have that, are trusted. Not. There's an uneasy, I guess, status quo in the world. Some people trust them more than other cultures. The rest of the themes, I guess, that I wanted to bring up as well, is there is no, well, outside of Amaria, who puts everyone in slavery, there is no real racism. It's more the people from the realm of Aldania will not trust the people from the realm of Hetar, because they border and they've got a history of like fights. And then there are, so it's more a nationhood of prejudice, as opposed to racial prejudice that appears in my world.
Well, I'm sure you've both, handled them, have handled those issues quite sensitively and appropriately. And, I don't doubt that, especially based on the reviews I read of your books, that, you do a very adept job at handling those difficult topics. I was just curious regarding that. So did those themes come up because they were things that were near and dear to you in general, just even if you hadn't experienced them yourself, that, for whatever reason, they had a personal attachment to you, something you particularly abhor, or something you felt was, the societal ill that, really affected you? Or like what I know for me, most of the stuff I write about and talk about has either affected me personally, or has affected me, friends or family, or things that, are just part of my moral compass that really, I feel that need to be spoken about. So was it something, those difficult themes in your book, did you tackle them because it was something more personal, if you don't mind asking, without, not asking you to go into?
I don't know. I don't know if it was directly personal, I would say, but I um, categorically have a great dislike to what I perceive as injustice that I see anyone having to experience. I get a very visceral anger response from seeing people, who are put in positions where they have to suffer needlessly, um, and unjustly. And I just don't, naturally don't like that. I don't have any that I know of direct, personal experience dealing with those issues on a personal level, you know. But I have seen those play out both in real life and in media that I've consumed over the years, and it's just something that I like to fight against. I like to um, expose and defeat injustice, and obviously there's lots of injustice in a lot of the cultures in the world I create, but I put those there so that I can show people overcoming the injustice. I put those conflicts in there so I can show people uh, able to overcome their own prejudices and come together like that. Like what Mark had said, I mostly don't have a lot of racial prejudices as we experience them in our world. It's more cultural and nation state prejudices against other excuse me, against other cultures and nation states, things like that. Also, there's not as much overt misogyny, homophobia, anything like that. I try not to include that in my story. I kind of have a world where it's just assumed that those things are kind of treated as normal. Those things are just kind of parts of how the world is. And so those issues I don't tackle as much head on because I have a world that doesn't have those specific conflicts. Obviously, there will be cultures that discount what a woman has to say when they shouldn't. And those are things that will be tackled in stories and things like that. But in general, that is not something that occurs because in most of the places that exist, there's not as so much heavier weight given to the words of a man over a woman as what we experience a lot of the time in our world.
Yeah. One of the things in my world building that I wanted to reflect in story is the lack of homophobia or sexism. It not even in a way where it's a thing. It just is. Like homosexual relationships are a thing. It's like people don't look. It's not a cause for staring or
Yeah,
excitement or even pointing out. It's
the Schitt's Creek approach where
yeah,
it just everything happens and it just happens and nobody, it's not a big deal to anybody. It just is. Yeah.
yeah. One of my favorite writers, Mark Barnes, who I mentioned earlier, he himself personally is a vegan, and he reflects that in all of his books. So whenever he talks about writing or talks about food in his writing, the food is vegan writing, and it's just is. No big deal is made out of it. Is no like this is because X, Y, and Z. It just is. And that was one of the things I was like, you know what? That's what I want in my book. It's there is no homophobia. Homosexuality is a thing. It just is. There is no sexism. Men or women could do whatever they want. It just is. It's not a thing. Same with race or color of skin. It just is. The only people who make it a big deal are one particular group of people, but they're a particularly arrogant group, and it's reflected in their cultural history. But it's a large place as well. So this world that I've created. So in percentage-wise, they are a small percent of people. That was really important to me that I reflect that in my book. I didn't want it to be politicized or anything like that. It just was. It just is.
And the rest is here. It's just such a fascinating discussion. I forgot to say hello. Hello, everyone.
It's a great guy. Hey, Andreas. Thanks so much. Oh,
Oh,
or lullabies. Oh, wonderful.
And the Schitt's Creek approach, yes.
I think we need and this is my opinion, doesn't get right, obviously. I think we need both. I think we need those books that depict those issues as being just, as you said, the Schitt's Creek approach. I think you need books that kind of, it's a bit more in your face and tackle those things head on. I think we need both, and there's room in literature, obviously, for all kinds of books.
yeah,
as
there are plenty. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you need every angle of everything, and there are plenty that do that, and do it fantastically. But yeah, it's good to choose your conflicts that you want to portray, because even if you have many different kinds of intercultural, interpersonal conflicts and prejudices to look at, it's good to settle on the ones that you and the ones that you can do best, so you can focus on those. Because one thing you don't want to run into, which it is easy to do in epic fantasy, because you're writing about so much already, is to run the risk of diluting approaching some of these conflicts and not rendering them the just amount of attention that they deserve. And I think some stories do focus on it specifically, and do an amazing job by focusing on it. And so with when it comes to your own writing, I find it's best to select the conflicts that you and prejudices that you want to focus on, and try to do those really, really well. Because the one thing that I didn't want to do was just brush over some of these deep types of conflicts and not give them the page time and the weight that they deserve.
I think for myself, it's also a reflection of my own personal experience. I am gay, and I'm not in the closet by any stretch, but I grew up in the 80s, and certainly in Sydney in the 80s, it was something, and I'm sure in other places as well, it was never, you didn't really advertise it. So it was never something that I had experience advertising, or even outside of things like Mardi Gras, marching for equal rights or equality. And the way I wanted to reflect my idea of society, or what I would like in my writing, was to be, it's here and it's not a thing. So I think that's one of the reasons I tackled that in my books that way. And certainly reading some of the science fiction or space opera that I read, I was really taken by how some of these writers were portraying equality between the sexes, and that was kind of like, yeah, I'd like to portray that as well. That's certainly, because it's never been a thing for me in my own life. I have very strong female figures in my family, friends who I worked with. So it's never been something that I've been hugely exposed to, sexism. So it just became a reflection of how I would then portray it in my work.
Yeah, fascinating. It's fascinating. Thanks for sharing, guys. That's been and just, it just makes me want to read your books even more. Just listening to you both talk about what they are, and they're already high on my TBR. So I'm really even more stoked to go click that buy button on Amazon.
Definitely.
And with the iceberg approach, you mentioned earlier about the reader only sees a portion of what all the world building that happens behind the scenes. Is it ever depressing to not have the reader see everything? Do you want to just give it to them just to say, here, just look at all the stuff I've worked on, look how cool it is? Do you ever want to kind of geek out with your readers? Is that ever disappointing to not share everything you've worked on with us?
Well, geek out with them, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I don't feel a compulsion to like. It's a mixture of like, hey, look what I did versus, oh God, don't look at all the time I spent doing all of this, please. So it's kind of it's kind of a little bit of both, but um, um, it's fun to talk about. It's fun to discuss things like that and go over them and stuff. But I don't feel compelled to divulge everything and say, no, you have to look at what I did. I like to put up little things. I have a lot of stuff, and I've been piecemeal, putting some of it up on my website just for people who want to go on and see some like lists of things or whatnot. And I'm periodically adding to that from my lore dictionaries and whatnot. But it's more just like for people who want to dive deeper into what they're looking at and get a good look at it.
I when I have my beta readers talk to me about stuff that I've written, it becomes a thing then where it's like, oh, did you notice this? And if you notice that, you know what that means. And I have to hold myself back. So it does sometimes move into the realm of, well, this will be a spoiler if you're able to understand what's gone on before or these references, then in my head, it logically moves to this. I mean, I suppose it's not always clear to everybody. They don't always see the big picture, but some people pick stuff up and just make those intuitive leaps. And that's always exciting. And I want to talk to them more. And then it's like, no, I can't tell you more. I want you to read and find out. So, yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to talk to me about the world or the world building, send me a message. Find it on my website. There's a contact me, or on Twitter or Instagram, whatever. Happy to talk about world building anytime. I love it. But for this book, what is the stuff that I've done? A lot of it, all the relevant parts are going to be revealed as we move along.
Yeah, I think for me, and I agree with you both. Like, and I love talking about world building. I love when, if and when, and it does happen periodically that, people read the book, come up with theories. I think this is what that means, and you're like, if only you knew, right? And not without trying to string people along. I love the fact that I feel about my writing. I'm sure you both may feel about your writing and terms of parts of it, that there is that element of it's a nice feeling to know that only you hold all the answers, and people are theorizing about well, this the reason why this happened, and you're like, oh no, you don't know what you're in for next, right? And that's very much how I feel about the series I'm writing now, is that it isn't really until the next book, the third book called Lord and King, that people are even going to have really a clue about what's really going on. And then they're going to be like, I hope they're going to be like, what is going on here when they read, the end of the book. And then that will just, lead to more speculation. And I love the thing about writing fantasy. One of the things I love is that, and the immersive world building and all that, is you can get completely lost in it, right? Completely lost and lost in, your these theories and ideas, these suppositions about, what this character's backstory is, or what this person, why they did that, what that's going to mean for the future. Do people try and predict things? You some of the biggest fantasy books in the last few decades, the biggest fantasy series, the Game of Thrones of the world, like there's all these theories. Who is this person's father, who is this person's mother, what's their origin, what's their lineage, what kind of magic can they actually use, to what degree, like that stuff just makes it just fuels and funnels this great discussion about the genre, right? And I just love that stuff. And so for me, when I read your books, I'll be trying to figure out, okay, I think that's what it means, and I'll write down my little theory, and then when say it doesn't come out till a subgroup, I'll be like, yes, I was right. So or oh man, I was wrong. I got that. I totally messed it up. So that's part of the stuff that I love about reading fantasy. So
yeah, 100%. All the I used to work in a genre specialist fantasy bookshop, or fantasy science fiction bookshop, and the conversations that we staff members and some of the customers as well would have about the latest George R.R. Martin book when it had been released, and who could possibly be Jon Snow's father, or what, all this sort of stuff, and the theories that we were pulling out, theories for Game of Thrones, theories for the Malazan stuff as well, and what does it mean? And yeah, they're a lot of fun to have. I have one particular beta reader I've had discussions with about one character, and she is convinced she knows this character inside out. And when I would suggest, oh, well, this is, it's going to head in this direction for him. No, he would never do that. There's no way he couldn't do that. It couldn't possibly happen. And I'm like, hold on, this is my character. I know this character. So it's almost like the character has become hers to a degree, or she's become attached. And that's really exciting as well. But I find it really, really interesting when they come up and start telling that character wouldn't do this. I'm like, pretty sure he would. But okay.
And we can confirm that Lana from Lauren Lullabies does annotate her books. Yeah, we've seen the proof.
And she bought a book. I think she said she just clicked buy on Amazon on her book. So
Lana's annotation is next level. We had a sneak.
Oh yeah, it's Watch that episode of there's a discussion about Zamil Akhtar's books, and with Steve, Lana, Taylor from Maybe Between the Pages, Zamil, and myself. And wow, you have to check out Lana's annotation system. It is completely, like Steve says, it's next level. It's so intricate.
I'm going to go find that now.
I definitely like to lead people along on theories and things like that of how characters will meet, if characters will meet, what their interactions will be like, what things are going to happen down the road. I do like to put in hidden foreshadowing, like not even the kind of foreshadowing, like regular foreshadowing I like to put into to build up to reveals and things, but I also like to put in like hidden in plain sight, giving things away to see if people will notice or have ideas about them, or if they'll just think, oh, this is just them talking about some silly anecdotal thing from history. This is just for them to make chit chat. This is, or if they'll see, oh, maybe this is important. I even have a hint hidden in there about some major thing that will be revealed probably 7 books down the road in the series. So I don't know if anybody will notice that, but I did put something like that in there so that they can refer back to that moment from book 1 when they get to that point and be like, oh, okay.
I'll be digging now. Okay, when I buy, I'm gonna be the code cracker. I'm determined now. I'm gonna get it.
I do lots of little fun little things for in case anybody ever does a reread, so that when they see little throwaway lines, be like, oh my god, that's
that's what that meant. Yeah.
That one line gave away the whole book.
Mark, you do the same thing? I do the exact same thing.
Yeah. I just finished a novella that will be coming out in May. Give away to newsletter subscribers, and my editor had a couple of gasp moments. It's actually set way before Blood of the Spear, but it is really connected, and there is a character from Blood of the Spear who this is about. And there was some, even as I was writing, things started. It's that I don't know if you guys experienced this, but I had written a draft of Blood of the Spear, and I was going through a second draft, and I decided to change a bit character towards the end from one thing to another. And as soon as I changed it, all these connection points just appeared across the entire story. That was like my subconscious had already put them there, and I just hadn't consciously put the right part in.
I love when
And
that
when I
happens.
was, yeah, it's amazing. I was just like, it still blows my mind to this day how it just all connected and grew, and it actually made the story like bigger. And writing this novella, it's just, I basically, yeah, there's a whole heap of stuff that happened in it that is like, oh, okay, so that's how that happened. Or this led to that. Oh, okay, I can see these points in the timeline that are just like, firing up as I was writing this stuff that I hadn't planned beforehand. It just happened. And then you get to the end part, and like my editor said, she had her gasp moment when she got to the end. It was like, yes. So yeah, good stuff.
And Lana said, we readers do become attached to characters. They start out as yours, but then we own them. They become a part of us.
I do
Yeah.
love how people develop a favorite character, and it's so interesting to see which one it is, because different people will have different favorite characters depending on how many characters you have, and it's always fun to see where they end up.
And the rest says it's rare for a reader viewer to have who is in the exact same headspace as the creator, which is appreciated when you deal with the latest work by David Lynch or Grant Morrison, and have someone who can explain, which is a great point.
Yes, very much so.
Especially those are two great examples.
Yeah. Have either of you? You may have experienced this probably or not. I know for me, there were a couple of characters that, going back to what some of the questions are, that frankly, their agency just took over, and they had more minor roles initially, the way I planned them, but they just kept screaming for more book time, and I felt compelled to give it to them and then as they gave them more book time, more readers began to like one character particularly in my books, Lacey, a mage. She just kept screaming at me like, I need to partially take this thing over. And the readers also responded, and when I started to give them agency, and she's become a favorite.
This is a real phenomenon. I experienced this as well. Way back, this book was just like in its infancy, was just one character point of view, and then there was another side character who occasionally got little bits of point of view, and then another character that was basically just a throwaway character. But the side character, ended up demanding to be a point of view character, because they have a very unique voice, and are out of the favorite characters people have told me about. This is the one that recurs the most. So they get a lot of page room, and luckily they get a lot of page room in the next book. But then there's another character who began as basically a red shirt. In the infancy of the story, they were a red shirt that doesn't even show up until like the next to last chapter, and they were just like not even, they didn't really have a name or anything, but some part of me, like the personality that came out for them in that little tiny moment that they were in the book, ballooned into this giant character. They ended up becoming a main point of view character in the story, and so now they're one of the big three main characters.
I had a character. I was about 5 chapters into my second draft, and this character just stood up in my mind, fully formed. I knew everything about them, and they were like, yeah, I think you've forgotten to put me in. And I had to go back and start from the beginning and weave this character in the book, and he fit perfectly. Like, it was not hard at all to do. And yeah, so I had that happen, and that was quite startling. It was fun.
It's amazing when it works out.
Yeah.
It's so amazing how these little things that will spontaneously pop out of nowhere will end up, making your story,
Yeah.
and how those characters can take over, and the things that they do uh, will end up making the story so much better, making the conflicts so much better, making the emotion so much stronger, like from something that was just a spontaneous little spark thought, you know. It's so fun to have happen. It feels like it's not even you writing it at that
Yes.
point. It really feels like it's just
Yeah.
taking over uh, yourself. A big twist in the book was a character who was just supposed to be an ally that, like, one day I spontaneously thought, what if this person's just a total traitor? I didn't even think about why they would be a traitor. This is way back when I was first writing, early drafts, and just that thought out of nowhere made me retroactively go back through the story and be like, what would it mean for them to be, and where would that come from, and just that one little thought, rewrote a big chunk of the story, and it's just so fascinating when that happens.
And I can relate to Kay's Hidden Shelves comment here a little too much. I always try to keep an eye out for hidden details, and they usually go over my head anyway. Someone always tells me, "Did you catch this? And did you catch that?" I was like, "Oh, I missed that." I have to go back and try and find it.
No, I'm like that as well when I read stuff the first time round. It's like, yeah, I didn't catch those things. Go back and be like, how did I miss that?
Definitely. Yeah, I don't even catch the kind of stuff that I write into my own stories. So
yeah.
it's okay.
Lana says, "I love how some of these characters jump out and say, 'Oi, mate, I need to be here,' and write themselves into the story."
Yeah, that was
Favorite characters.
a really interesting experience to have. It was fantastic, really good, but it was very startling.
I think something we talk about a lot, we've mentioned several times on page chewing, and Steve and I have had discussions about it, is that, we as writers, obviously we're accountable for what we write. However, we don't own the books the minute it's published. It becomes the readers, their interpretations, their thought process about what this character, who this person is, and what they mean, and it's just so fascinating, and it's all very individual to the reader, right? And sometimes that's, you can forget as a writer, wait a minute, I didn't mean you to think that way about that character or see that insight. That's not how I wrote them, but it doesn't matter what, it's up to the reader, right? And that's also, I think for me, I'm not sure how you two feel, that's also been a really unique experience in the whole authorship thing, that, when people tell me, oh no, this is what that character is all about, and this is their character traits, and this is why they think that way, and this is why they're doing that. I'm like, but I didn't write him that way. But
Readers fill in the blanks. Yeah, it's no reader experience of a book is identical to another's, because it's
100%.
Your story is collaborating with their imagination to make a complete tale. And so everyone's imagination, everyone's going to bring their own things that they've experienced, their own thoughts, their own, set of other characters they've experienced in other books and movies, and people that they've met or known in their lives. And they're going to bring all of that to you, that in their mind to your story. And so that's going to overlay on the words you wrote. So that was one of the most interesting things I discovered, a few years back. I realized that, like, no person is going to experience your book the same as any other person is. They're all going to see it a little bit differently, way more so than like movies and TV. I mean, they're constructing the architecture in their minds. When you describe a building, they're the one who decides what it looks like. When you describe a person, they're the one who decides what it looks like to them, what that person looks like, how that person behaves, what their mannerisms are, based on the little information you give them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a reader will give characters backstory that's not even there. Like, they'll start to think back of other little, based on the anecdotes that you give them, they might go back and think of their own, you know, their own fanfic in their own head of what other things might have happened in this character's life based on their experiences. And it's just a super cool thing to realize that you're a part of that you're getting in tune with somebody's imagination directly to like tell a story.
How often does a reader's feedback like that, like just somebody has a reaction to a certain character, whether it's good or bad, or they have certain ideas for a character, how often does that, when you hear that, how often does that change what you planned for the character in the story? Does it ever change your plans or what you planned for that character?
It hasn't yet for me. um, yeah, no, I'm not sure that well, I probably could, but in my head, I'm not sure that I had that much wiggle room to dramatically change. Where, I don't know the details of every action or every event that's going to happen to them. I know the midpoints and the end point of where they're headed, and there are specific paths that each character needs to take. And they will respond in specific ways to these paths to get them out the other end where I have seen them going. So, and to be completely honest with you, nothing so far has been that far from what I've envisioned. It may not be exactly the same, but it's not that far off. So, so far I'm okay.
Yeah, I don't think, because again, I plan things so far in advance, and there's all the plot threads, major and minor, are pretty well mapped out. Like as Mark said, with very little wiggle room to deviate from that. I don't find, but what I do find though is there's times when I've thought about doing it. There's times when I've actually entertained because people have been said so strongly, so stridently about certain things. They'd be like, what, could I really change that and make it? And then, usually I go, no, but it just goes to show you how the reader's opinions can potentially impact, what you might be writing. I always feel like writers write their books for themselves in a way. And of course they're writing to a target audience, but we're writing the stories we want to write. Especially, I'd like to think indie writers, we write what essentially, those are the stories that are in our heads exactly the way we want to write them, right? While we all have editors and beta readers and things like that can influence us. I think because we have such a wider berth to, write those stories, whereas perhaps in traditional publishing, there's a bit more, when it comes to contractual things and editing requirements that, you may be a bit more, I don't want to say hamstrung, but you may be a bit more constrained. What I love about being an indie writer is that, I just write what I want to write, man. And I don't worry too much about, other than editing, I don't worry too much about the rest. But yeah, there have been times when, and it's more a credit to the readers, that the readers, credit to them that they've come up with these ideas that are fascinating. I'm like, maybe that's something I should include in the future book. How can I give that person credit for that later down the road? Say, oh, well, maybe the acknowledgments, it's because of that fan mail that I got that, I wrote a book just based on, but yeah, it is interesting how, again, we write these books and then the readers read them, and then you get that feedback, and that two-way feedback is great to get as well. And, sometimes they can potentially at least have you thinking about, doing that stuff. So
yeah, I haven't had anything change anything. It's mostly just been very validating when people really like the thing that happens to be the thing that they're going to get a lot more of in the story, and the characters that they're going to get a lot more of. There was, I guess there was one thing that was changed because of beta reading, but not from an actual, that was during the developmental process. So there was something that was changed one big thing about a character was changed in that process, but that was prior to publication. Nothing after that. After people have seen the story and said, "I hope this happens," nothing like that has affected where things are going to go. It's more of just like tee hee hee, just you wait then, or no comment.
That famous read and find out.
Exactly. And I mean, I've gotten a lot of, from beta readers and an editor like, are you sure you want to do this? I've gotten a lot of those. Are you sure you want, because this is a terrific, because I'm known for killing a lot of characters. I might get a bad rap from that because I also am known for naming a lot of characters. And so I like to name my red shirts in the story so that they, if they're interacting in any way, I like to make sure they have a name so that people might get an artificial impression of how many main characters or primary side characters, that are perishing in the course of a story. But, I just tell them, yes, I'm sure this side character is, this is where they go. And it'll just be a challenge for me to make another equally as interesting side character next time in the next book, or wherever you want to go. It's so I have gotten some feedback like that. Are you sure? Are you sure you wanted to do that right there? And I'm like, yep, afraid so.
Yeah, it's so funny because we when you look at series, I hate to keep picking on the great George R.R. Martin, but when you look at series like A Song of Ice and Fire, that it was game changing the way he killed off his darlings, right? Or our darlings, should I say? Maybe they may or may not have been darlings to him, but and I think
it's a lot more jarring too. Just to point out briefly, it's a lot more jarring in the book than it is on the TV show for people who haven't read the book, because in the book he is a point of view character.
Yes, exactly.
The world is experienced through his eyes, and to have a character like that die, like in the Red Wedding when Robb Stark perishes, he's not a point of view character. Yeah. So he's just somebody else is watching him get killed. Yeah. And it's a lot more jarring even, which was very innovative in my opinion for George R. R. Martin. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to point out that how wild that was when I first read that.
No, awesome. And I totally agree. Thanks for that. And whether it's Robb or Catelyn Stark or Jon Snow, where you name your character, what he did, obviously was starting off with Ned. What George R. R. Martin did was finally give you that, I think, that sense of heightened insecurity and tension that everybody really deep down wants in a book. That, once Ned got beheaded, well, no one is safe. He's not joking. Like there's books where you feel, okay, the author's trying to create a sense of no one's safe, but George R. R. Martin did it. No one is safe. I will kill anybody. It doesn't matter.
And it worked to perfection, because if you notice in book 2 and even season 2 of the show, no other major character dies that entire season. People don't realize all of season 2 and most of season 3, nobody else major or important dies, yet they still have that idea in their head just from what happened to Ned is just carried over and followed them this whole way. That's how powerful that level of raising the stakes can be.
Yeah, it's genius. And obviously I'm looking forward to reading both of your books. And I can't wait to see what you do and how you handle, your major characters, and how their paths, what their paths, especially over the course of a series, right? Because a character may be alive in this book, but they may not be alive in by the end of the next one, and that's the beauty of series too.
Writing blurbs becomes increasingly difficult the further a series goes on.
Yeah, you have to have that appropriate.
Make sure not to mention a lot of names.
Yeah, that ambiguity about not mentioning, or you give people a red herring. It makes it seem like someone's going to make it through, but really they don't if you write the blurb well enough. So, yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks to you guys for Mark and Thomas for coming by to chat with us about world building. It's a really interesting subject for me because as a reader, it's when it's done well, it really adds to the experience, the immersion, and the story, especially fantasy. So, for anyone wanted to find you or connect with you, Mark, where's the best place to find you?
Best place would be my website, marktimmony.com, Twitter, also Mark Timmony, or Instagram, Mark Timmony. Facebook as well, Mark Timmony.
Mark, why do you have to make things so complicated?
I know, right? It's really difficult to find me. Sorry.
And Thomas, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I'm at thomashowardriley.com, and I'm Ornithopteryx on Twitter. Those are the two places where I'm most interactive. I'm also on Instagram as Thomas Howard Riley as well. Yeah, those are the primary ways to get in touch with me. And, apologies again for the voice. I know every time, Steve, I'm on a video with you, my voice sounds completely different from the last time. So one of these days, you'll get my real, honest to God voice. I swear.
I can take a hint, Thomas. No, both of your websites are in the description already, so I'll add the Twitter stuff. And PL, of course, where's the best place to find you and order your new book?
You know, I'm all over Twitter. I think people know that. You know, the website www.plstuart.com. On Twitter, it's at plstuartwrites. Same on Facebook. Same on Instagram with the dots, and so. But the best place to get hold of me is Twitter. Send me a DM. My DMs are open for writing related business. You want to talk fantasy or things like that. So I love engaging with creatives, and there's so many great people in the writing community, and that's what I love about doing this show and featuring fantastic authors and people such as Thomas and Mark. So yeah,
I just love getting to talk to you guys, man. Get to see you guys' faces in person and whatnot. Well, digitally in person.
Yeah,
that's a real treat. That's a real treat. Thank you for coming on.
It's still
Thank you so much for having me.
It's just still every time we do this, it's amazing to me. We can connect with people from all around the world and talk about something like fantasy or books or writing or world. It's amazing we can even do this. So thank you guys for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you for having me. And my cat.
Thanks, guys.
Penelope is glad that you had me as well, so you can see her on video.
Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. It was amazing. Thank you. It was an honor.
Thanks, everybody.